Hi, U.S. history students. Our first learning objective that we will address is understanding the causes and effects of the first contacts between people of the Americas here, these two continents, the people of Europe, and the people of Africa, their first large scale contacts, how those contacts affected the economies, geographies, social, and political conditions of all of those parts of the world. So, in order for us to address that, we're going to start with looking at what the world was like before these interactions. And first, we're going to look at what the world was like for native people on the Americas, these two continents. I might call those people natives. I might call them indigenous people. I might even refer to them as aboriginal people. But these are the earliest humans inhabiting these continents. Okay, so let's get started in addressing the economic, political, and geographical conditions of North America and also South America. Okay, so for us to uh, address that and understand it fully, we first want to answer the question, how did the earliest humans arrive in North and then eventually South America? There have been a lot of theories developed, but the largest accepted theory is that during the Ice Age, about 22,000 years ago, hunters crossed exposed land between Alaska and Asia here, the Siberian region. So the theory is water was held in glaciers in this light brown area, and so a land bridge was exposed. That land bridge has just been called Beringia, if you want to write that down, Beringia, the land bridge. And during the Ice Age, thousands of Asians moved in or migrated because these are nomadic people. They were just following their food source, which would have been large game animals at this time, following their food source. And then as the temperatures warmed and the ice melted, the migration stopped. In recent history, though, I'll just add that archaeological evidence suggests that humans were in North and South America prior to the Ice Age. So it is very possible, plausible, and it can be supported that humans did cross over the Bering Sea using ships and canoes and that sort of thing, sort of island hopping along the Alaskan coast and the Siberian coast into migrating into present-day North and South America. Okay, so we know that these first native people were nomadic. Okay, that's a very important social studies term. Nomads are people who don't have a permanent dwelling. What they live in are temporary shelters that they can erect and break down very quickly. As their food source moves, they can move. So nomadic people are people who do not settle permanently, and we know that these first Americans were in fact nomadic people. Okay, but if I can direct your attention here to the lower left portion of the screen, you'll see that some Americans started to settle and build permanent shelters, and from building permanent shelters, they developed really complex societies. This happened in the region that we today know as like the countries of Mexico and Guatemala, but we call this region Mesoamerica. The area in Central America where the earliest Americans domesticated, settled permanently, and developed really complex societies. Okay, so what allowed for that to happen? Agriculture allowed for that to happen. These civilizations could specialize because they weren't as motivated or they weren't as concerned by their food source. Their food source wasn't a dire concern. They had more control over their food source. They could plant and they'd have a harvest in the same location, plant annually and have a harvest. And so they had a continual, dependable food supply. That need was taken care of. And so they could specialize in developing other aspects of their culture, like architecture and art, and they developed more complex religious structures, more complex governing structures, and then even the Maya developed a writing system and a complex understanding of math, particularly geometry, and the buildings that they erected became more permanent, and as time grew, much more complex. Okay, so this agricultural revolution happened somewhere between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, and we know that that happened in central Mexico. But what agricultural product seemed to be the staple for these people? Without question, it was maize or corn. Corn or maize is a staple, a stick to your rib kind of filling agricultural product that allowed for these societies to thrive. Okay, so some complex societies that developed long before the arrival of Columbus and Europeans after him. The first of those complex societies was the Olmec, and we see sort of a pattern of rise and fall. When one of these kingdoms loses dominance in the area, then another kingdom will emerge in its place. It was first the Olmec and then the Maya. The Maya, it's a name heard historians and students of history for a long time. They had a calendar system, understood the stars and astronomy very well. Their calendar rivaled that of the Julian calendar, extremely accurate with 365.4 days in the calendar year, many observatories they had. They also had, within their numerical understanding, they had a concept of zero, or the absence of a value, which the Romans at the same time of the Maya did not have that mathematical concept, that zero concept. So that's kind of interesting there. One of the reasons that we're talking so much about the advancement of Native American cultures is because there is a false understanding that Native people were barbaric, lacked civilized advancement, and that's just not at all true. When the Maya Empire fell, the Aztec Empire rose in that Mesoamerica region and took its place as the dominant force in Mesoamerica. The Aztecs were fierce warriors. They built their capital city in the middle of a lake. Their capital city is called Tenochtitlan. Lake Texcoco is where they erected this capital city, and they constructed this elaborate system of canals to travel within the city. It was teeming with trade and teeming with agricultural products and merchandise for sale. And we will read some of Columbus's, and not just Columbus, but particularly Cortez, Hernan Cortez. Will read some of his writings about the Aztec and how beautiful their capital city was and how it was full of merchandise and a lot of valuables. Okay, so other early civilizations before Columbus, you had in North America the Anasazi or the Hohokam. These are the ancient people that eventually the Pueblo could trace their ancestry back to. These are desert dwellers. They built their homes out of cliffs. They dwelt in present day Utah, Nevada, Colorado. Okay, and then here you see in North America the Mississippian Indians. These are mound builders because You've got lots of rivers and creeks and a lot of waterways here in the American Southeast. It was important when flooding occurred for these people to have shelter, a place that they could escape the disasters that would follow flooding. So the Mississippian mound builders were known for mounds that they built usually. Some were kind of temple-like, others were in the shape of snakes, animals that were sacred. The Adena and Hopewell people were also mound builders, but more northeast. Okay, so these are ancient complex societies at prior to the arrival of Columbus and other Europeans. So ancient desert dwellers, we talked about them. They grow corn maize in the dry desert. They grow a drought-resistant corn, and they use irrigation systems in order to flourish their farming. That's just digging a ditch to get your water from the waterway to your crops. This is a picture here of those homes for those Pueblo. They become the Pueblo, Anasazi, Hohokam, eventually the Pueblo. And here you see pictures of these mound builders. We talked about the Mississippian mound builders. This is actually a picture from a Tuscaloosa mound. Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian natives were mound builders. But at the time of Columbus, what did North America look like at the time of Columbus? Okay, North America was inhabited by many tribes that were mostly nomadic, especially here in the plains. You had many nomadic tribes, and in the northwest, this Great Basin region, you see nomadic tribes. In the east, these tribes are more permanent because they have a more stable water supply. They can aggregate and farm much better on the eastern side of North America. So many tribes that have their own language, they have their own culture, their own customs, and they are, get this, not unified under any sort of central government. These are independent tribes that have their own languages, customs, and geography plays a great role in the development of culture of these independent tribes. Okay, most of them do not have a written language, spoken language, obviously, but not written language. They do have things in common, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that they have in common. The Pomo Indians of California are their geography is important to them. They whale. They eat salmon. Why? Because these are coastal Indians. They're protected by the Sierra Nevada mountains on their eastern border, and so they live mostly peacefully without a lot of warring. But what's life like for the Northwest Coast Indians? In the Northwest, you have not only fishing resources, but you also have large game resources in the area of what's present-day Washington and Oregon. So these people are known for a wealth of natural resources. They're also known for the totems that they built in honor of their ancestors and their gods. They are very spiritual people and worship things that are associated with nature. And then in the American Southwest, you have the Pueblo. We talked about these desert dwellers already. We know that they use irrigation. That's important. They also will settle near their waterways, and they build these multi-story complexes. You notice that they're not using wood for log cabins or anything like that, because the resources in their area would be clay. Okay, so they have this dried brick adobe that they use to build their homes from. These farmers will grow corn, beans, squash, and they build these underground ceremonial rooms in the base of caves, and they're called kivas. Okay, In the American Northeast, the woodland area, we have one of the most dominant tribes at the time of Columbus. It's actually a confederacy of about 5 tribes, the Iroquois. The Iroquois have woods, forested areas, so they're gonna be able to build something like log cabins. They're called